Chapter 7. The Terrible Secret. When the children first went to live at the White House, they talked about Father a lot and were always asking questions about him. But as time passed, their questions seemed to make Mother unhappy, so they stopped asking them. But they never forgot him. Bobby thought about Father often. She knew her mother was unhappy, and she worried a lot about that. And why was Father away for so long? Was there something that Mother wasn't telling them? The answer came on the day she went to the station to fetch the magazines. They were old magazines, which people left on trains or in the waiting room. Perks said the children could have them to read. And one day Bobby went to fetch them. "I'll just put some newspaper round them to keep them together," said Perks, and he took an old newspaper from the heap. The magazines were heavy, and Bobby stopped to rest on the way home. She sat on the grass and dropped them beside her. As she did this, she looked at the newspaper and read some of the words on the page. And it was like a terrible dream. She never remembered how she got home, but she went to her room and locked the door. Then she took the newspaper off the magazines and looked at it again. The words seemed to jump at her. 5 years in prison for spy. And the name of the spy was the name of her father. Bobby was very quiet at tea time. "Is anything wrong?" Mother asked her. "I'm all right," said Bobby. But after tea, Mother went up to Bobby's room. "What's the matter?" she wanted to know. For an answer, Bobby took the newspaper from under her bed and showed it to her mother. "Oh, Bobby!" cried Mother. "You don't believe it, do you? You don't believe Daddy is a spy?" "No!" said Bobby. "He's good and honest, and he's done nothing wrong," said Mother. "We have to remember that." "What happened?" asked Bobby. "You remember the 2 men who came to see Daddy at the old house, don't you?" said Mother. "They said he was a spy, and that he'd sold government secrets to another country. There were some letters in Daddy's desk at his office. When the police saw them, they were sure Daddy was a spy." "But how did the letters get into his desk?" asked Bobby. "Somebody put them there," said Mother. "And that person is the real spy." "Who?" said Bobby. "Who put the letters there?" "I don't know," said Mother. "But the man who got Daddy's job never liked him, and he always wanted Daddy's job." "Is he an honest man?" asked Bobby. "Daddy was never really sure," said Mother. "Can't we explain all this to someone?" said Bobby. "I've tried, but nobody will listen," said Mother sadly. "I've tried everything. There's nothing we can do. except be brave and patient. Now, we won't talk of this any more, my darling. Try not to think of it. It's easier for me if you can be happy and enjoy things. But Bobby did think about it. She did not talk to Peter or Phyllis, but she wrote a letter to the old gentleman. My dear friend, you see what is in this newspaper. It is not true. Father never did it. Mother says someone put the letters in Father's desk, and she thinks it is the man who got Father's job. But nobody listens to her. You are good and clever. Can you find out the name of the real spy? It is not Father. Peter and Phyllis don't know he is in prison. Can you help me? Oh, do help me. With love, from your friend, Bobby. She put the page of the newspaper with her letter and took it to the station. Bobby asked the station master to give it to the old gentleman the next morning. Now she could only wait and see what happened. Chapter 8. The Boy in the Red Shirt. The boys from the school in Maidbridge are having a paper chase today, said Bobby the next morning. Parks thinks they'll go along beside the railway line. We could go and watch. There were men working on the railway line, and the children began by watching them. They almost forgot the paper chase, and were surprised when a voice said, "Let me pass, please." It was the first boy from the school. He's the hare, explained Bobby. All the other boys are the hounds, and they have to chase after him. There was a bag under the hare's arm. It was full of pieces of paper, which he dropped behind him for the other boys to follow. They watched as he ran into the black mouth of the tunnel. The workmen watched him too. "He shouldn't go in there," said one. "It's only a game," said another. "Passengers shouldn't cross the line." "He's not a passenger." Then came the hounds, following the pieces of white paper. They came down the steps at the side of the tunnel and disappeared into the darkness. The last boy was wearing a red shirt. "Will they take long to get through the tunnel?" asked Peter. "An hour or more," guessed one of the men. "Let's go across the top of the hill and see them come out the other end of the tunnel," Peter said to his sisters. The tunnel was cut through a hill. They climbed over stones and through narrow openings between trees. And at last they reached the very top of the hill. "It's lovely up here," said Bobby, as she looked across the fields. "It was worth the climb." "The paper chase is worth the climb," said Phyllis. "But hurry, or we'll miss it." But there was plenty of time. And they had to wait at the other end of the tunnel.
"Look! Here he comes!"
shouted Peter at last. The hare came very slowly out of the shadows of the tunnel. Soon after came the hounds. They were going slowly too, and looked very tired.
"What shall we do now?"
said Bobby.
"That's not the last," said Peter. "The hound in the red shirt isn't out yet."
They waited and waited, but the boy did not appear. The children began to worry, and they climbed down to the mouth of the tunnel. But they couldn't see a boy in a red shirt.
"Perhaps he's had an accident," said Peter. "Let's go and look."
The tunnel was dark after the sunshine outside, and they walked beside the line.
"If a train comes, stand flat against the wall," said Peter.
His voice sounded very different inside the tunnel walls.
"I don't like it,"
said Phyllis. There was a low noise on the railway line.
"What's that?"
said Peter.
"It's a train,"
said Bobby.
"Let me go back!"
cried Phyllis.
"It's quite safe," said Bobby. "Stand back!"
The train came towards them, and the noise got louder and louder. Then it was screaming past, and they could feel the hot air and smell the smoke. They pushed themselves flat against the tunnel wall.
"Oh!"
said the children after it was gone. Peter took the end of a candle from his pocket, and his hand was shaking when he lit it with a match.
"Come on,"
he said, and the three of them went deeper into the darkness of the tunnel. The boy in the red shirt was on the ground beside the line. His eyes were closed, and he did not move when they reached him.
Is he dead?"
asked Phyllis. "Dead? No," said Peter. And slowly the boy opened his eyes. I think I've broken my leg," he said. "How did you get here?"
"We saw you all go into the tunnel, and then we went across the hill to see you all come out," explained Peter. "The others came out, but you didn't. So we came to look for you."
"You're very brave," said the boy.
"Can you walk if we help you?" said Bobby.
"I can try," said the boy. He did try, but he could only stand on one foot. "Oh, I must sit down. The pain is awful." He sat down again and closed his eyes. The others looked at each other.
"You must go and get help,"
said Bobby quickly.
I'll stay with him. You take the longest bit of candle, but be quick.
Peter looked worried.
Let me stay, and you and Phyllis go. No, said Bobby. You two go, and lend me your knife. I'll try and cut his boot off before he wakes up again. Just be quick.
Bobby watched their figures disappear, then put her little candle beside the boy's foot. She used Peter's knife to cut off the boot. Then she looked at the broken leg.
It needs something soft under it, she thought,
and then remembered her petticoat. She took it off and carefully put it under the boy's leg. He woke up a few minutes later.
What's your name?
asked Bobby.
Jim,
he said.
Mine is Bobby,
she said.
Peter and Phyllis have gone to get some help.
why didn't you go with them?
He said.
Someone had to stay with you,
said Bobby.
I must put out the candle, or it will burn itself out.
Are you afraid of the dark, Bobby?
asked Jim, when they were sitting in the darkness.
Not very afraid,
said Bobby.
But
let's hold hands,
said Jim. He put his large hand over her small one. Then they sat and waited. Peter and Phyllis went to a farm to get help. When the two children got back to the tunnel with the men from the farm, they found Bobby and Jim asleep. The men carried Jim on a piece of flat wood.
Where does he live?
asked one of them.
in Northumberland,
answered Bobby.
He told me while we were waiting.
I'm at a school in Maidbridge,
said Jim.
I suppose I must get back there. A doctor ought to see you first,
said the man.
Bring him to our house,
said Bobby.
It's not far along the road. I'm sure Mother will say it's all right.
Mother did say it was all right, although she was a little surprised at first. Then Bobby explained.
I'm sorry to be so much trouble,
Jim said to Mother as the men carried him in. His face was white with pain. Don't worry, you poor dear, said Mother. You must go to bed, and I'll send for Dr. Forrest. Mother also sent a message to Jim's school to tell them what had happened.
My grandfather lives near here,
said Jim. Then I'll write and tell him too, said Mother. I'm sure he'll want to know. What's his name? After breakfast the next day, someone knocked at the front door. That will be the doctor again, said Mother. She went out of the kitchen and closed the door. But it wasn't the doctor. The children listened as Mother and the visitor went upstairs. They heard them talking and were sure that they knew the voice of the visitor. But who was it? After a while, the bedroom door opened, and they heard Mother and the visitor come down and go into the front room of the house. Then they heard Mother calling, "Bobby!" Mother was in the hall. "Jim's grandfather has come," she said. "He wants to see you all." They followed Mother into the other room. And there sat their own old gentleman.
"Oh, it's you!"
cried Bobby.
"How wonderful!" said Peter. "But you're not going to take Jim away, are you? I was hoping he could stay."
The old gentleman smiled.
"No," he said. "Your mother is very kind. She has agreed to let Jim stay here. I thought of sending a nurse, but your mother was good enough to agree to be his nurse herself."
"But what about her writing?"
said Peter, before anyone could stop him.
"There won't be anything for him to eat if she doesn't write."
The old gentleman smiled kindly at Mother.
"She has agreed to stop her writing for a while and become head nurse of my hospital."
"Oh," said
Phyllis.
"Will we have to go away from the White House and the railway and everything?"
"No, no, darling," Mother said quickly. "The hospital is here, at this house."
"And my unlucky Jim is the only one needing a nurse," said the old gentleman. "But there will be a maid and someone to cook the meals until Jim is well."
"Then will Mother start writing again?"
asked Peter.
"Perhaps something nice will happen, and she won't have to," said the old gentleman. "Take care of your mother, my dears. She's a woman in a million. Now, perhaps Bobby can take me to the door?"
The two of them went outside, and the old gentleman said,
"I got your letter, my child, but it wasn't necessary. When I read about your father in the newspapers at the time, I began trying to find out things. I haven't done much yet, but I have hopes, my dear. I have hopes."
"Oh," said Bobby, crying a little.
"But keep your secret a little longer," he said.
"You don't think Father did it, do you?"
said Bobby.
"Oh, say you don't."
"I'm sure he didn't," said the old gentleman.
Chapter 9. The Man at the Station. Life at the White House was never quite the same again. Jim's leg got better and better, and he told them stories about his school. And now Mother was not writing stories every day. She was able to teach the children their lessons.
"I wonder if the railway misses us," said Phyllis one day. "We never go and see it now." It seems ungrateful," said Bobby. "We loved it when there wasn't anyone to play with. And we've stopped waving to the 9:15 and sending our love to Father by it." "Let's begin again," said Phyllis.
So the next morning, they ran down to the fence and watched the 9:15 come out of the tunnel.
"Take our love to Father!"
they cried as they waved their handkerchiefs. The old gentleman waved from his window, and there was nothing strange about that, because he had always waved. But now, hands and handkerchiefs and newspapers waved from every window of the train, and smiling faces looked up at the children on the fence.
"Well," said Phyllis. "What does it mean?" said Peter. "Perhaps the old gentleman told the people to wave," said Bobby.
But she had a strange feeling inside her, a feeling that something was going to happen. Lessons with Mother were difficult for Bobby that morning. She found it hard to think about them. "What is it, my darling?" asked Mother. "You don't feel ill, do you?"
"I don't know,"
answered Bobby.
"Perhaps I'd feel better in the garden."
But the trees and the flowers all seemed to be waiting for something to happen. It was one of those quiet September days when everything does seem to be waiting.
"I'll go down to the station and talk to Perks,"
she thought. Everyone seemed to have a newspaper in their hand that morning. Several people waved theirs at Bobby and smiled as she went by. People who never usually waved or smiled at her.
"How strange,"
she thought. Perks wasn't anywhere on the platform, and Bobby had only the station cat to talk to.
"How kind and friendly everybody is today,"
she said to the cat. Perks appeared when it was time for the 11:54 to arrive. He had a newspaper too.
"Hello,"
he said to Bobby.
"I saw it in the paper, and I've never been so pleased about anything in all my life."
"What did you see in the paper?"
asked Bobby. But already the 11:54 was steaming into the station, and Perks was looking in all the windows. Only 3 people got out of the train. The first was a woman with 3 boxes of chickens. The second was a woman with a brown suitcase. And the third...
"Oh, my Daddy! My Daddy!"
cried Bobby. That scream went like a knife into the heart of everyone on the train. People put their heads out of windows and saw the tall, white-faced man and the little girl with their arms around each other.
"I knew something wonderful was going to happen,"
said Bobby as they went up the road.
"But I didn't think it was going to be this. Oh, my Daddy!"
"Didn't Mother get my letter?" asked Father.
"There weren't any letters this morning,"
said Bobby.
"Oh, Daddy, it really is you, isn't it?"
He held her hand and said, "You must go in by yourself and tell Mother very quietly that it's all right. They've caught the man who did it. Everyone knows now that your daddy isn't a spy."
"We always knew you weren't," said Bobby. "Me and Mother and our old gentleman."
"Yes," said Father. "It's him I must thank." And now they are going across the field. Bobby goes into the house, trying to find the right words to tell Mother that Father has come home. Father is walking in the garden, waiting. He is looking at the flowers, but he keeps turning towards the house. Now the door opens. Bobby's voice calls,
"Come in, Daddy! Come in!"